Hi, everyone. I am finally getting that long promised coding demo to you. After we didn't have time to do it in class, I got thinking about it. And what I was originally going to do is just to show you some existing code and kind of walk you through some things in place. But then when I realized I had more time, I thought it would be better to actually start something from scratch because it's going to be more like what you're doing and you won't get bogged down in code that has to do with other stories, because the whole point of this, of course, is to show you what it looks like to just take a single story and put that into place. Bonus though, you're going to get to kind of see how to connect an Angular front end to a Spring backend. So we see this. Let's go up here and take a look at kind of where we were in lecture, right? So the idea is to get, a setup done, and I've already done a lot of this. I'm going to show you in a second. Get a framework, get your database initialized, have your folders organized with your repo. And then, we're going to use a feature branch to do just what we want to do for this particular story. And then I'll show you how to kind of push it all back into master, or push is the wrong word, merge. Okay, so we're going to come back and look at this in just a second. So let me get over to the repo that I started so you can kind of see. I've got this one called Liftoff user story demo. And what I did was I cloned that down. And then I created a Spring project at startspring.io. And that's the demo backend is what it's called. And if you come in here, you can see it's got all the typical folders you would expect to see. And then I created an Angular project called demo front end. And so then, of course, it has all the file structure you would expect to see. So that's really all I've done is set that up for this. And then I pushed that. And I've got that in main so that it's a good starting point for us then to have a feature branch to build off of this. So let me show you. Yeah, so you can kind of see I've got that file structure here too, right? So I cloned this down. I've got it all in front of me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open one of them. I'm going to open the front end in VS Code, and I'm going to open the back end in IntelliJ. And I actually think that I'm going to do, realize I don't have IntelliJ on my bar because I hardly ever use it, honestly. It's been a couple of years since I did Java. Okay, so yeah, so you can see I've had this open before, but I'm going to open demo backend. Now I don't want to open the main folder for the entire repo because I'm only interested in the backend project. So, and that's because I moved it. All right, let's go find it. Here we go. Launch code, Liftoff. Here it is. Nope, this one. All right. And yes, you can always trust this project. Thank you. Okay. So you can see here that I've got this, and I've got it in full screen mode, and I can't see the top of it because of Zoom. So let me pull this down. There we go. All right. So a couple things to show you, the build.gradle file. I've added, the proper dependencies here in order to have the MySQL database. Everything here is going to be pretty much like what you've seen in class. And I decided to use version 17. You don't have to. The important thing is just that it's set to version 17 in all the places it needs to be set. So like, for example, making sure the JVM is set to 17, those kinds of things. Okay. So we've got this, and then in the application properties, I've got all the settings and stuff. And you'll notice here that I've decided to use environmental variables here so that when I'm pushing this code to my database, excuse me, my GitHub repo, that information is not public, and that's something you're going to want to make sure to do. And you're probably wondering, well, where do you store these then, right? So if you go up to run in your menu, and then choose edit configurations. It brings it up, and then you just click on this little icon over here to edit, and you can go in and set them right here. Just add them in and set them. And then you can use them right here like this with interpolation, and you'll be good to go. I also added this additional thing. I was having a little bit of trouble getting my tables to set up, and I believe it actually made a difference. So I don't know if that's going to help you or not, but sometimes these things are a little tricky, but I got it going. So we've got this going, and I also set up my abstract classes. I've got abstract entity, and then because I have a good idea that several of my classes for this project would need names as well, but possibly some of them only need IDs, I separated the name out into a named entity. So named entity, as you can see, extends, it inherits the ID from abstract entity. So I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to extend named entity so that I actually am going to get both the ID and the name. We're going to do that in a second. Let's go back and look, though, at the slide here. So we had said that we've got this user story. You want to be able to create a new project that has name, type of room, and its dimensions. This is the wireframe, and this is the data schema. Since we're going to start with the back end, I'm going to talk about the data schema. The ID will be assigned by Hibernate through that abstract entity that we just saw. And the name has to be specified up front. So that's important to have for the class. And then, of course, in the back end, it will be assigned automatically through the named entity class being inherited. And then these 4 are the ones that we're going to need to set up in our new class. So let's do that. I'm going to go over to my file tree here, and you can see that I've got the models underneath demo backend, the project. And so far I've just got my 2 abstract classes. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to add a new Java class, and we're going to call it project. Okay, so we've got this project file, and we are going to need to extend named entity and extends. My bad. Knew that didn't look right. Okay, and we also want to use the entity annotation there from Hibernate to make sure that it understands it's supposed to create a table for this, right? All right, and then we need a constructor, which even though it's not going to have anything in it, it's required in order for it to work with automatically creating everything. So then we want our 4 properties that we just talked about. So I've got string and room type. And then I'm going to have a double for room length because ideally, ultimately, we'll probably want people to be able to work with not always round numbers, but to have, like decimal numbers for their room dimensions. And width and private. Oh my goodness, what did I do? All right, room height. And then really all I need to do is just take advantage of IntelliJ's wonderful little generate function here and do getters and setters for all 4 of those. Awesome. Okay. And that's pretty much all we need to do for this. It's very straightforward. And you remember from the demo that ultimately a project has an estimate, it has like material and labor costs, has all these additional information, but that's not on this story. This is all that we want for this story. We're just starting out with the basics. So we're good there. Okay, so now that we've done that, the next step then would to be make sure we have a data repository. So I'm going to add a new package here called data. And then inside of that, I'm going to add a new interface called interface, and we'll call it project repository, consistent with what you guys have been learning. And the only thing that this really needs to do is, hold on, I'm checking my notes to make sure I get this right. Yeah, it just needs to extend CRUD repository. And of course, we also want to be able to import our project. Yep. Hey, look at that. Okay, project. And then I've got my thing set to, that would have been easier, huh? Automatically update the imports, and it thought I didn't need it yet, so it made it disappear. Okay, and of course the ID is our primary key, so we need that integer there. Okay, and then we just need the annotation for Hibernate. But this is a repository, and we have all of the imports that we need now. So this should be set, and then we just need to go and create a controller. So let's see, I'm going to add a folder here, package, controllers, and then inside of that, we want a class, and we'll call it project controller. .java. Okay. Hold on just a second. All right. This, for the sake of time, I am going to paste in from my other files from the finished product that I've got, that I created, but I'll walk you through it. Okay, so this is going to look a lot like the controllers you guys are used to, because it is. What's really changed here in order to make this a REST API is we've given it the REST controller annotation, and then we've also given the cross origin. So there's this thing called cores that you may or may not have had to deal with, where even though for the purposes of running a local project, because we're going to be fetching from a different port, from port 8080, from port 4200, it still treats those as if they're two complete strangers. And cores is something that's put in place to protect, like you can't just go in and accept calls to an API from anybody, right? And you'll see sometimes people bypass it by putting a wildcard, asterisk here. That's not, I mean, if you're just doing a small local project like this, it doesn't really matter. But if you were going to put it out there, you would never want to actually do that, because then that means anything would be acceptable. In this case, we know exactly what we want to do. We want to accept localhost 4200 because that's our Angular project that's going to be making those requests. So it is simple to just go ahead and do this, and then it is protected, and it's very specific about what it'll allow requests from. Okay, and then this will look familiar, request mapping, and you've got your endpoint. So this is the endpoint for the fetch for the front end that is now a REST API. And so this is typical, got auto-wired for Hibernate for your project repository. And then we're going to do post mapping here for this particular function method so that we can actually post information to the project and save things in the database. That's what this card is about. We're not interested yet in get or put or delete or anything. Those would be coming down in later cards. So for now, we're just going to do the post. We just need this request body project that is of the project class. And the first thing, of course, we're going to do when a call is made to save something is to take in that project and save it to the project repository. However, on our front end, we're probably going to be doing things that are going to need to know, oh, hey, Hibernate, what ID did you assign to this project, and can you give it to us, please? And so this is the way we do it. We establish an ID by going and getting it using all these lovely CRUD repository methods that are built in for you. And then create a quick map that basically just sets, this object here that has ID and gives you that project ID. So that's the JSON that'll come back by virtue of having set it into this and then just including that in the response entity that's returned. And then you have the created HTTP status, which is just the 202 status that you'll see as a successful response. So this is really the basics of what we need in order to make this work. But of course, in order to truly test it, we could test this with Postman or something, but I don't want to make this a super long video, and we're about to create the front end. So we're just going to go straight there and just do that. However, I just realized I just made a bunch of changes. I'm still on main. That's a bad idea. So here's what we're going to do. I believe I spoke in class about how the wisest way to do this when you're working on both front and back separately is, especially if you have kind of two different teams of people working on it, is to have separate branches for each. And then later you can have a third branch that is kind of your integration branch, right? So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to create a new branch, do it the long way, check out -b. And yeah, forgive me if I use my aliases, guys. It's second nature, but I'll try to remember to spell everything out. And let's call this one create project back end. So we're clear that this is the back end. All right, so we're on a new branch. I'm going to do let's see, I just did it, get status. And we can see that I modified some things and also have some, it's because they're new, right? Okay, created them and then modified them. So I'm going to do git add dot because I know that I want all of these on this commit. All right, so now we're good to go. So git commit -m. And I'm going to say created project model, repository, and controller. Pretty straightforward. With, I'll just say with API project endpoint. Okay, that's pretty good. And honestly, I did all of this so fast. I put it all in one commit. You're going to want to get in the habit of doing things. And I'm still learning to do this even now. And at work, I can get busy working and I just kind of keep going. I think it would have been better, honestly, to have done 3 separate commits, to have done a commit after the model, a commit after the repository, and a commit after the controller. So think about that. Try to do things in small spurts. But that's okay. We've got it all. We're good to go. And then I'm going to push it. And because this is a new branch locally that does not exist on the remote repo, I'm going to do git push -u origin and then use the name create project back end. Okay. And I still have a typo. My goodness. All right. There we go. Okay. So now that's been created. And if we head back over to our thing here, I can, yeah, see that, create project backend had recent pushes less than a minute ago. We can see now that that's available. And you could also see that I've got my finished version 1 in there, right? That's going to have everything that you'll see at the end. Okay, so we have a back end. We're pretty sure it's in good working order. Let's move on to the front end. So I'm gonna put away, oh, you know what? I didn't run it. We should always run it to make sure that it actually works. And so let's make sure it builds okay. No. And then actually spin it up to make sure that it's running. Yeah, looks like it's good. And that's fine. I can leave that running. I also have the database. I didn't show it to you yet. Let's do that. This is from my previous incarnation, so I'm going to drop this. Oh, I didn't need to do that. Yeah, I just gravitated towards the green, right? Okay, drop now. Okay, So I've got, you can see I've got my user story demo project here. And you can see I've still got my old tech jobs from when I was a student. How about that? And there's the construction estimator. In any case, there's, still that left over from where I was experimenting before. But if project didn't exist yet, that wouldn't be there. So that's why I dropped it. And you'll see it reappear in a minute when we actually get it going. So I'm going to leave that well enough alone for now. And then we're going to come over to Visual Studio Code and get started on this front end. Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay. And because I moved it, I know I need to open it from here. So momentarily. All right, front end. Yes, so we want to make sure we just have the front end project and not the entire repo. Do keep in mind, though, that when you are working like this, if you're working in both, you've got it all spun up on your computer, if you switch branches or anything, it switches branches on your whole computer. So just keep that in mind. And that's going to become important in just a second. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We have a basic Angular project. So far, I have not added a thing. So if we look at it in the browser, and I need to, so we'll do it actually, yeah, so we're in the front end folder like we're supposed to be. But we're still in that back end. You see, I've got my thing customized, so I can tell where I am. We're still in the back end branch. So let's take care of that. Let's get checkout. Sorry, get checkout main. Okay, and now we're going to get checkout B, and we're going to create a new branch. And this time we will call it create project front end. And I know this probably sounds confusing about using the words create project. I'm not talking about the capstone project. I'm talking about create project being the user story, right? Because this particular project is about projects. If you are creating a, let's say it's a lending library app or something, you might have a function for check out books or something. So then you call it check out books, front end. Yeah, I just want to clarify that. Okay, so we're going to create this. And now we have something straight off of main to work with. And I'm going to serve up this app as it exists. And it's taking its time. Give it just a second. Okay. And if we go over to our browser and open up, oh, I actually already had it open, didn't I? Yeah. Okay, it's here. And you can see this is just the default information that is comes with a brand new Angular app. So, we don't want that. So let's go ahead and get rid of it. So we're going to come over here to app component HTML, and I'm going to delete literally everything. And then same thing with the CSS, because I do not, oh, that's actually in styles. Here we go. Oh, maybe not. I thought it came with a bunch. Oh, that's right. They put it in a style tag. It was all built into the HTML page. That's cool. Okay, so we're done. We've got that going. But what we do need is a new component. So I'm going to come over here and, you can kind of see, the file structure in the terminal here. Let me move this over because we're mostly now going to be working with the Git here. You can see that I need to come down into these project folders. I'm going to CD into source and app. And then I'm going to, I could actually create it up here too, but just so you can see how it's done here. I'm going to make the directory projects and then CD into projects. And you'll notice the file tree just updated right up here, right? You can see projects now, but there's nothing in it. So this is where, now that I'm in that folder, I'm going to do my NG and then G for generate and C for component. and I'm going to call it create project. Okay, and then before I forget, I'm going to go back up to source just so I'm encompassing any changes that I make. It'll be easier for doing staging with Git from the command line. Okay, so now I have all these, and I can actually go back to my app page here that I've got and put in app create project. And now we have this as the placeholder that will put everything we want right here on the homepage. Ultimately, this is not probably how you're going to do that, right? You might have some sort of other like home page or something, and then eventually you'd add in some routing, like we could come in here and create a route for it. But we're not concerned with that yet because this is just kind of our first go. It's our first card, and we're keeping it very, very simple. So all I'm doing is putting this directly onto the main page here, and then we'll be able to see things right at localhost 4200 and not worry about any routing just yet. Okay, so we've done that. We are going to need a class. So you remember I talked about how some classes need to be mirrored from the back end to the front end because you want to, kind of have the same format. In this case, it makes sense because all the fields that we've got correspond to that structure, right? So we can actually use the project class as a way of collecting our data from the form, like binding to the form, and then just save it straight from that structure and not have to move it around too much or make it complicated. So I'm going to set up a class that is going to have exactly those properties. And bear with me for a second. I'm switching over to find those files so that I can do it quickly for you guys. I know it doesn't feel like it's quickly because I'm like, stalling, but I promise I went too far up. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, so right here in app is actually where I just went to the wrong thing. Sorry guys, I'm used to having this in full screen, but I can't really do that with Zoom. Okay, I actually do want to go into app, and this is where I want to create my class. So I'm going to do ng for Jen, and then I'm going to say class, and then we're just going to call it project. It's going to be straightforward. And then we should see that show up. And you'll notice that it also created a spec file, which is a good idea. There is a way, I don't remember how to do it, where you can like tag something onto this to get it to leave the class out and just create the class. I'm sorry, the test file, but it doesn't hurt. And honestly, I'm a big believer in unit testing, and maybe it would be a good idea, especially because this is going to be kind of a showpiece for prospective employers, right? For you to actually write a couple of extra tests once you get some code in here, or even before, as you've been trained to do. And there again, I might, mention Mars rover and make some of you spit out your drinks. But okay, so here's our class. It's going to be super straightforward. We're just going to have that ID, right? Name, which is a string, and this is Typescript, remember? So we're typing things, declaring them up front. Also a number and room height. And you'll remember that in JavaScript and TypeScript, there is no like differentiation between like integers and doubles, right? It's just numbers. Okay, and then we need a constructor, which I cannot spell apparently. And again, we are going to type them. Now you'll notice I left out the ID. That's because that's assigned from the back end. And so we are never going to have it to instantiate something from the project class. I mean, you could, I suppose, if you were using it as a means to like save something back, but it's not necessary in our case. So we're just going to leave that alone. And I believe we have all 5, yes. And then of course, this dot name equals name from the parameter, this dot room type. So now we're assigning whatever comes from here, we're going to use that as the value and we're assigning it to these. They all have the same name and that can be confusing, but just in case you're ever wondering which one was which, that's what it is. Oh, and look, it's like, you know, giving me suggestions. Okay, this dot room. I really should have just copied and pasted this. It's a little bit tedious. All right, height equals height. Good, okay. And there again, we'll have other things later in this project. We would, if you guys were gonna do this, we'd add to this class and modify it a bit for future needs. But for right now, for this card, this is all we need. So we're gonna call that done. And I'm going to be a good little Git user and actually, you know, make a commit at this point. So let's just add all. Oh, I need to go up a couple. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to git add all and then git status. I'm slow when I'm not using my aliases. Okay, everything is where we want it to be. So let's see, we added project class and project component. No, create project component. Okay, just kind of got those set up. Good. Now we want to come back over to, see, we're pretty much done with that. And we're done with this, but we may want to reference it. So let's start, I think, with the layout. And so, you know, come back to your wireframe and kind of say, okay, you know, I want to have a little title. I want to have, you know, the name first, and then, and you can see actually right here that originally when we envisioned this, we thought we would kind of do this with like images and then you would just click on the image you wanted. And we ended up later just using radio buttons and saying, oh, well, we'll change that later if we have time. And then we ran out of time, and that's okay. So there's still radio buttons. So that's what we're going to do. And then these are, you know, actually input fields for numbers. And then you got a button. So this is kind of what we're shooting for, is something along these lines. It is not going to be pretty because this is just the very, very beginning and we're not interested in like fancy UIs. We want to get it working. So I'm going to come back up here. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my files again so I can, just got to get in the right directory. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to paste this in and then I'm going to walk you through it, because I don't want it to take too much time. Yeah, so if we go over right now, if we go over in our browser, we should see create project works because we placed this directly into the home page. So let's just make sure that's true. Yep, there it is. Okay, so create project works. So now that we have that, let's, sorry, switch, put this away. How's that? There we go. Get this where I can get to each of them. All right, let's, oh my goodness. There we go. Let's put this in. Let me walk you through it. So we've got that header, create a new project. We have a form, and you'll notice that I'm using this template reference variable. I'm using that in several different places for different inputs. That is, you may recall this from having used it in Unit 1. This is a way for you to kind of combine some attributes. So like this takes care of name, it takes care of ID. And it also is the reason they call it a template reference variable is because you can actually refer to it from other places. So if you had some other like handler on another element, but you needed the value from like one of these other inputs, you could use that as a reference. What it basically is a local variable name for this HTML document. So that's super handy. What I'm doing right now is going to be very straightforward, so I'm not going to need that last aspect, but it is nice to have it be both the ID and the name. And then I've got several things going on here. So let's go back up to the first one though. This is just a straight text input. It's the name, and placeholder is just going to say project name, and we're going to have a simple change handler, an event that calls something called update name. And of course, we have to create that in our TypeScript file for this component. It's not there yet, but that's what it will do. As soon as you start typing, every time you make a change, it's going to update the value using that handler. Okay, so then, let's go skip down here and I'll come back to that in a second. Then we've got the 3 down here, the dimensions. Those are also straightforward, right? Just straight number type inputs instead of text. I've given them a minimum of 1, seems to make sense because, it's got to be at least, the room has to be at least 1 foot wide, right? And then again, a change event handler. But here, and a submit button. And you'll notice that the submit function is actually up here on the form. I will show you why in a minute. We're going to do it that way. And this is set to ng form. We're actually going to use the forms module that is built in with Angular to make this work. So this is going to take care of saying when this form is submitted, then this is the function that we're going to call that'll make the fetch, the call to the API, and actually send that project back to the back end. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about the inputs for the room types. You recognize ng for loops, but what you may never have seen before is this idea of indexing. And so what this does is it allows me to access some arrays of data and use those values dynamically to produce 3 different inputs that actually have different logic here. It's got a different value, and I actually display something different. And so right now we don't have that set up, but we're about to. But basically it just loops through and it's going to create 3 of these labels with inputs. And each one is going to have different information because it's pulling from the arrays that I'm about to create. And this just basically says that this one is checked. It should be checked only if the current saved room type of the project, and that's another, it's a variable, a property that we'll create, is equal to the same string that's coming from the rooms thing. And then of course the value is, what is that actual value that's associated with this element. And then of course it's the same change handler. If it changes to this, it picks it up and saves it. Okay, so let's talk about the TypeScript then. Right now we have just the basic thing that it creates whenever you create a new component. It puts this together for you. So I'm going to bring this over and we're gonna work through this a little bit. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is import the project class. And yeah, there it is. Okay, because we're going to be working with that. And before the constructor is where we want to declare our properties. So the first thing I want is properties for holding information in state. And state is a term that isn't used very often with Angular, but you'll hear it used with other things like React or Svelte. And it basically just means whatever the current value is that it's holding for this component. And you can keep changing that value and it's going to hold it so that everything else has access to it. Okay, everything else within the component, I should qualify that. So we're going to set up a new, now notice that VS Code is prompting me. It knows that we have this project class. And so it's saying, okay, here's all the properties and their types. So make sure that's what you put in, right, in that order. So name, we're not going to give it a name yet. We're going to want to make it default to kitchen, just so that that checkbox will be, I'm sorry, that radio button will be selected. And then everything else, the remainder will be null. Because we aren't going to have any of those things yet. Okay. And then the ID will be a number that we will actually get from that. Because remember I said that on the back end, we have our controller save, and then Hibernate puts it in the database and issues it a number. And we're going to send that number back as a response from the API. And so then we'll be able to use this variable to store that. Okay, so that's those, and then we need some data for displaying radio buttons with NG4. This is what I was talking about. We have these arrays. I'm going to copy and paste them in to save some time. Famous last words. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so 3 different room types: kitchen, bath, and living. And therefore 3 corresponding room titles, which is what I want it to actually display. So you remember over here, rooms is what we were using for the value and for checking the string against what's been saved, from that value into the project object. And it'll take this element. So this room type is referring to that reference variable right there. It's going to take this and it's going to update it with that. And then it'll display, as it's looping through, the same index, the room title, so that we actually see the radio button displaying, because this is the label that's just outside the input, right? That it's displaying this, proper name here. So that's where those come from. That's what they're for. All right, so nothing inside the constructor. We don't need anything inside ng-on init because we're, not doing any sort of, we don't have any services in play, any sort of authentication at this point. We're just getting this little form taken care of. Okay, so we need some event handlers for those input fields. I'm going to copy them in and we'll talk about them. Each one of them corresponds to one of the input fields, right? To type them properly, because what I'm actually passing in is the whole element, you actually can just use this given HTML input element that exists that basically represents that whole thing. And then we pull the value off of that. And this is probably going to feel a little bit familiar if you remember working in the DOM. It's kind of the same idea, right? This is an object that represents that object in the DOM, and we're pulling the value off of that object. And so those properties just exist in the DOM. And in this case, we've set that value to be, very specifically whatever came out of that array on each one of those loops. And so it's going to say, I'm going to grab that value, and then we're going to take this .project, so this thing we created up here, and we're going to assign its property that it has in its structure from the class and give it that value. And so we do that for each one of those. And remember that these are change events. So this is going to fire every single time you make the slightest change in the form. If you type a new letter into the text input, or you click up or down on the number input or whatever, or change radio buttons, it's going to change. And that way you're constantly updating those values, and they are ready for you whenever you're ready to save. So now I'm going to copy this too. The last thing is that save button. So we're going to submit this. And you know what? Since we've got the, even before we test whether this works, let's just take a look at it. We have a problem. Oh, right. Okay, so you remember what I said about the forms module, right? ng form depends on that, and we haven't added that yet. So let's do that. You're going to want to come into your app.module.ts and then look down here at imports. And what we want to do is add forms module. And you'll notice it added the import up here. So it's pulling it in from Angular/forms. And now, in theory, we'll have fixed that. Apparently not. Export of name, ng form not found. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, I figured it out. Essentially, because I made a fundamental change to app.module, I actually had to reserve it. So yeah, so if you just, Control C here and do ng serve, then it'll rerun it and recompile everything. And then once it comes up, yeah, guys, I totally paused the video so I could figure it out for a minute. And okay, so yes, so now it's here. You can see it's not pretty, but it works. We've got, this field and our little radio buttons and the general dimensions of the room and our button. And because we have actually just put everything into place, it should work, but let's talk about it first because this is going to be new to you. Okay. So save project. This is the handler or function rather that's called, well, it is a handler. It's essentially a click handler that is called when the button is clicked, but it's actually on the form here with ng submit. And I've got a console log in here because as I was developing it, I was like I wanted to make sure it worked before I did all of this. And I just want to make sure that the handler was firing, and it does. So it lets you know it's saving the project. So now we have the fetch. You may or may not recognize this. I'm not sure if they are teaching the newer syntax for this or not, but async await is like the new way of doing like .then. So it's very clean, it's very straightforward. So as long as you make your function an async function, you can use await for asynchronous requests like this. So first we're going to save the response. Whatever comes back from the initial fetch, we're going to save it in the response. So we await the fetch, we put in our path, the endpoint that we want from our backend, which is localhost 8080. And then we pass in this object that says it's the post method. And it gives us a couple headers. One is the content type. It's application/JSON, which is pretty typical. And then this, it has to do with that course thing I was telling you about. And basically just says, okay, so that you know it's coming, this is who we are. Because you remember on the back end, we said we're going to allow traffic, a request to come in and be accepted if it's from this. So we're saying, yep, this is who we are. Please accept us. And then the last piece, of course, is the body. And we are sending the project as it has been saved. Because remember, every time we make a change here, it's continually being updated. So it already has exactly what it needs in it based on, what was updated from the form, and it's ready to go. So we just go ahead and stringify it and send it as the body. And then we wait for that response. So the payload is going to be the JSON from that response. And so we just await that. And of course, you remember that the payload is supposed to be that, ID 32. And so I console logged that to make sure I could see it in the, in the browser as it was happening. So we should, kind of see this happening. And then the last thing here is that this is actually not necessary for this card, for the story, because we don't need to do anything with the ID yet. But for the sake of this tutorial, I wanted to put it in here just so you understand. You want to save it, right? And that's why we created an ID property up here. You want to save it so that you can do things with it because, yeah, like for example, with this project, then the plan is to then, reroute them and send them to a details page. And the routing would be slash, ID number, whatever that ID number is, because that project detail is very specific. So that would be part of that, that URI parameter, path parameter. Or, maybe you're saving it for, your service. It's some sort of token. So the reasons why you might need it, this is how you would do that. But mostly what we're actually doing for this card is just saving it to the back end. So we just want to verify that happened, that we get that response back that we're expecting and not an error response. Okay, so we've got our front end code looking pretty good here. Our form is on the page displaying. We're pretty sure we've got this handler right, but we can't test it until we have a back end. And while we have a back end, it's in a different branch, right? So in order to bring these two things together, we can pretty much call this branch done. So let's commit whatever we got. Okay, so. All right, so I'm going to get commit, and I'm going to say that we added form and handlers, etc. to create project component. Okay, that's a generalization, but it covers it, right? Okay, and it also includes adding that forms module to app.module.ts. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and push this as well. So we're going to get push-u origin create project front end. Okay. So now that we have both branches, if I were a different person on a different local machine, I would need to pull down the other person's, other branch in order to, have access to that code to merge it in. But I happen to do it both on this computer, so I can skip that step. But what I do want to do, and of course, if you were going to do that, you would want to, just to cover it, you'd want to go back to master. So we're going to check out main, actually, main, and you would do, a get pull. Now, I'm already up to date because, like I said, everything's here, but that's how you would do it. And then your computer would have knowledge of any other, branches out there. You could do a get branch -r to see what those are. And then you could make sure that you, check out the one that you want. So right now, I think what I'm going to do is just check out the front end. It doesn't really matter which one. And then I'm going to create a new branch from this. Get checkout -b. And we're going to call this create project integration. Okay, so because I'm creating this from front end, it means it'll already have all the code that's in front end. So I'm good there. And now I'm going to do a get merge, and I'm going to merge in create project backend. Waiting for my editor to close the file. Okay. Oh, there's a problem with the editor. Oh, interesting. Wonder why it's doing that. Oh, it doesn't like my text editor, apparently. That's interesting. Oh, the merge is still open. Interesting. Okay. It didn't create a message. Okay. Guess I'll just do the commit then. One hand, merge back end into. Okay. So that was supposed to be smoother than that, guys, but that's essentially what we're doing. Okay. I guess I need to change my Git config to use a different editor because it's having issues. All right, so we should now have, if we go over to IntelliJ, we should see our new stuff, yeah, showing up, project and stuff, because now everything is in the same branch. That's good. So that means I'm going to stop this and I'm going to run it based on the code that it has now. And then see what's going on here. Do we have an actual error or does it just need to be restarted? Compiled successfully, that's what we like to see. Okay, so it's where the rubber meets the road. Let's go look. Okay, so let's say we're going to do a kitchen remodel. And it's 18 by, I don't know, 16 by 10 kitchen. Project. Saving project. There's our project and there's our ID back. So that's good. That means that it received it, Hibernate assigned an ID number and gave it to us. And it is 15 because I have done this a few times when I was setting this up for you guys. Now we need to go to the database and actually see if it's there. So remember that when you don't see a new table, it's just because you have to come up here and refresh it. And there it is. So let's take a look at that. And there's our kitchen remodel. And you can see it's got the ID 15, our height, length, and width, and the room type right there. So we could, come back over here and we could, clearly we're going to need to do some work because it's not clearing out the form after it has sent it in. So you could put some code in to have it take care of that. We are going to not do that right this moment. I'm going to call this one done. So let's do this. We're going to, we know that it's working. Yay. We're going to make a commit then. There's nothing to commit. We just need to push it because this branch has not been pushed. Okay. And this is the branch that we want to actually merge into main, but we want to do it through a pull request. So we're going to get and, wow, I'm tired. Okay. Git push -u origin and create project integration. Okay. Cool. All right. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this. And let's just focus here on GitHub. This is what we've got left. So I need to refresh this. Okay, create project integration had recent pushes less than a minute ago. I can compare and pull request. So it says it's able to merge. We'll create this pull request. And we can see the commits that were made. At this point, you would want somebody who has not worked on this, assign them to review it here. And have them come in and just pull the code down to their machine, make sure everything works. If they see anything that they think should be done differently or is broken or whatever, they can let you know. You guys can look at the files changed, and of course this is mostly just a bunch of files being added for the first time, and put notes on them. You can come in here and do this, right? I think we covered all this before. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And so once you're sure, then the person who reviewed it or someone else should do the merge. And because it has no conflicts, you're good to go. You can merge it. and say, you know, confirm merge. And now, when you go back to here and you're in main, you can actually see your new files. We can prove it by going and finding a file that didn't exist before, right? Like there's our project class, there's our projects create project. Yeah, everything's in main now. And we verified that it was not broken, it is working. So now you have your core code in main represents something that is working and is further along than it was before. You have successfully completed a user story. And that, folks, is how it's done. So good luck with your projects. I look forward to seeing what you got.